evening and welcome back, poetry lovers. It is IZMY's here, Ambler, and their home recording just for you. This piece was published in none other than I Exist, an ever-growing anthology produced by Unalome Press in South Africa. And if Vanessa Jacobs, the great and powerful founder and editor-in-chief, is watching this, thank you for having complete and total faith in my words. I am nothing short of honored to be included in this anthology among many talented word wielders. This composition, along with 4 poems, one of which became a song, is in the anthology, immortalized in parchment. Little backstory about this piece. Even though poetry has usually been my main go-to, whether it remains a poem or becomes a song in the future, I was always very diverse about what I read and wrote as a child. And believe it or not, among various types of prose and poesy, I wrote fiction as well. And it was usually short fiction. Around the time high school ended, it became too tedious for me, both reading and writing fiction. But several years later, a professor invited me to edit his short story collection, and I found myself immersed in it once more. And found myself reading short speculative fiction once more. Now, mind you, this piece is not speculative whatsoever, but just wanted to let you know. I wrote this piece to see if I still got it, so to speak. And believe it or not, somebody on this planet deemed it decent enough to publish. Thank you, Vanessa. And I guess I still do have it, so to speak. And I present to you, in full, Krej, Lacinyc pisses off another. Why did it just stand there, flaunting unwanted arrogance? 6:08 on the dot is when the alarm sounded to wake one Krej Lacinyc, or Mr. L, as various coworkers called him. In an age where word pronunciation websites were readily available, he was not surprised that the audio-generated voices practically stumbled over his name. Eastern Europe is home to many fascinating last names that could potentially be a mouthful and a half to an outsider's ear. In the grand scheme of things, they were just words, nothing more, nothing less, though they meant more to Mr. L than the average peeploid, human. He stretched a tad, removing the covers that kept him secure, the spherical pillow that served as a cuddling companion, though it was no replacement for a human being. As Mr. L stretched, he expelled those routine morning grunts, one often typically emitted, with just a hint of gibberish added at the end to spice up his life. He sat upright, briefly recalling the previous night's anthologized myriad of unconscious delights. His dreams were usually nothing short of vivid due to his overactive imagination. Such flashbacks included failed attempts to slay 8 gray dragons that resided on the great red spot of Jupiter, a battle of wits with a mathematical genius, and psychotropic-induced visions of a dancing Sumerian demon, chanting the following verse 8 times in rapid succession. On a rope ladder to Jack's moon, on a scythe to Saturn, curved smile of a blade glares against virginal eyes to burn. I must use this for a future notebook, he thought to himself, and quickly documented those words soon after. Mr. L was a full-time editor for a major publishing firm in downtown Chicago, but artistic creation was where the passion truly lied, whether by the written word, oral pleasures, or the seldom-seen abstract visual sketch. While he worked in Illinois' major metropolis, the village of Skokie was where he called home. After all, he was a born suburbanite who preferred the balance between metropolitan mayhem and the silence of the more rural areas of the state. After reorienting himself, Mr. L prepared to greet the dawn. He stood and looked directly at his bedroom mirror, an action that was almost impossible to pull off until just recently. While remembering self-esteem exercises, he viewed before him a Caucasian man of almost average height, buttocks-length dark brown hair that was in desperate need of brushing, and an average body that was striving to become fit again. That was the primary objective for setting the alarm so early. The alarm itself was less than pleasant. If Mr. L was slumbering in the middle of Interstate 94 and a speeding semi happened to drive by, the truck's blaring horn would be the last sound he would hear before his body was pulverized upon impact. This sound greatly resembled that of the alarm. He had no choice in the matter, though, for he worshipped sleep and required a strong motivator. Mr. L took a look at the entirety of his current shelter. His abode was spacious for the most part, but quite narrow in others, as it was a condominium, his late grandmother's condominium to be exact. He inherited the place upon her passing. It felt peaceful and serene to be close to her on a spiritual level. Never before did he ever think that a haven could be so sentimental. He gathered his running attire and proceeded to put it on. A run through Skokie would not take very long, as it is a compact village, especially when running in a straight line. He made the choice to run past Wilmette, the next village over. This routine would provide ample time for the near-perfect cardiovascular activity his body so desperately craved. He thought of this routine, as well as the selection of music he would listen to on his MP3 player, now considered by society to be vintage. What song would he start out with today? Perhaps a jazz-infused piece like The Monster by Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich? Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division was high on his list as well. Had he run 2 days ago, he might have selected Manic Monday by the Bangles. He finally settled on a number called They're Red Hot by Robert Johnson, followed by I Wonder by Rodriguez. He always preferred to pick his preliminary songs before walking out the door to save time on inevitable indecision while stretching beforehand. He found it befuddling that world leaders are required to make split-second decisions that could affect the entire globe, yet he could never decide on a bloody song. Mr. L had much to look forward to. This fitness run, a fresh cup of rose hips and hibiscus tea with honey and squirts of lemon, his career, his creative life, and life itself. There is much to be grateful for, his mother always stated. Her optimistic syllables surged through him like the burst of energy he envisioned. Just as he was about to grab his set of keys and head out into the dawn's waking eye of crimson orange, he stood, almost frozen in place. Water break. His eyes could not help but stare at the note that was written on the same notepad that one would use to write a grocery list. He knew in his near-microscopic heart that he should not read its contents, whether aloud or in his cranium. Alas, he did so anyway. Dear Krej, a.k.a. my L-Train, it has been an incredamazing 4 years. You have treated me like no one ever has, like a person with a mind of their own and not just a canine's chew toy. Throughout our time together, you assisted me in discovering who I was truly meant to be in this perplexing blue-green sphere. Unfortunately, you had failed to do so yourself. You are a spectacular human being with a cache of many gifts. Your friends and family see it, yet you do not. I just cannot love someone if they do not love themselves first and foremost. Lo siento, mi querido. This is just not going to last. Please know that I do not regret a single moment with you. I hope for your sake that someday soon you will see yourself the way others see you. Adios, mi amor. Always and always, Selena. Perhaps he was meant to read it as a test to help him develop more of a thicker skin. Why would he keep it in the first place if all it did was emotionally torture him to pieces? Was it a memento? Was it being spared until winter when it could be utilized for kindling, along with the disorganized stack of love poems and songs he wrote for her? This note was a friendly reminder and a jolt of reality. Evasion of those sage words could mean a more rapid deterioration of the mind and body. Mr. L's fitness and health goals would surely be in vain. He had to make drastic changes, lest he found himself in a gray cloud of melancholy outcomes with no possible escape. Ah, prophetic Selena! His attention directed itself to the visage of her. Selena Loza, 34, 3 years his senior, was a flexuous soul with the artistic mind of a talented goddess who specialized in various manifestations. At times, she was the canvas, displaying her lengthy raven hair of curls and batting her eyes of cacao before a premeditated audience. Her laugh screamed the word contagion. She always felt at peace in his arms as he did in hers. They were undeniably the living epitome of a power couple. Oh, dash it all! Why did he think now would be the appropriate time to conjure up memories that would never again serve a purpose in his life? He could not help but reminisce about her caramel skin, the way she would build his fluency in Spanish, and the many times she spoke her mind about what irked her in this world. Nevertheless, he knew that the only logical solution was to move forward without the temptation of looking into the past. He went through the necessary mea culpas to reach this point. After all, 3 months had passed since Selina made her grand exit. Mr. L thought about the prospect of hating her. Not deliberately, of course. This experimental hatred would be directed towards the purpose of fully pressing onward. He then scoffed at the idea. How could he hate someone who he still felt so strongly about? Besides the obvious, even hatred in the so-called experimental sense would be counterproductive to the final step in this particular chapter of his personal ascension. He had to transcend his mental boundaries. As the late Miles Davis's mindset proclaimed, the antithesis of the norm was the rule. Scattered guidelines from those in the arts, from Gwendolyn Brooks and David Bowie to Sappho and Federico Garcia Lorca, aided him in the discovery of the self. In times of desperate need, he would often turn to Sadhguru. He did not agree with every word of advice that was given through the Guru's endless archive of recordings, as he possessed a mind of his own. Then again, that was the entire point of advice, wasn't it? Was it not? An individual takes it into consideration and then proceeds to make the final decision. Setting that matter aside, he made his way to the door with keys and MP3 player at the ready. It was at this point where Mr. L felt a familiar tugging in his bladder. Ah, Krej, the morning sign of life, he thought. Yet another interruption. How he loved running beside the sunrise's escalation. If he let his mind wander for too long, he might not make it in time. The oddest and most minuscule events served as nothing more than an inconvenience to him, including pain. If some lunatic left Mr. L mortally wounded from a gunshot, it would be a nuisance, putting a damper on the rest of his evening. At least this was a bodily function, and not a major catastrophe. Rerouting his physiological GPS to the appropriate destination, Mr. L walked briskly to the restroom, facing the commode. He placed his keys and MP3 player on the sink's countertop, as he was an occasionally forgetful character of sorts. As he proceeded to pass water, as many a person would call it in the days of his elders, he stared at the piece of artwork that hung on the wall straight in front of him. It was an original piece that a friend gave to him as a birthday present. She soon produced another after she was commissioned by an independently owned gallery in the area. It was a uniquely designed mandala with a vagina in the center. It contained colors that represented the illumination of light from within. Surrounding the vagina were varying symbols of innocence and symbols of power. She aptly titled it Lilith's Portal. He could not stare and analyze for a prolonged duration, though, given his current situation. For Mr. L, urination seemed to be an activity that required complete focus and concentration. He chuckled, marveling at the wonderment of his phallic ally. Today it converted and ejected the previous glass of H2O in a different form. Last night it was a monument, a tool that he used for fantasies of sentimental hogwash, which then produced ivory honey. Though it was a release, it was a mere band-aid in comparison to love-making with a life partner. This fusion of a flashback and realization was randomly interjected by something peculiar. It was an itch or a similar feeling on his big toe that was located on his right foot. It appeared to be a medium-sized dark brown spot. He looked closer. As the image of the spot sharpened, it was none other than an adolescent cockroach. One's initial reaction might have been to squash the creature or let the jitters take over the body. That, however, was not the case with Mr. L. He had been desensitized due to the location where he previously resided, a fictional town near Galveston in the Gulf of Mexico, where roaches were as common as blades of grass. He still felt a tad uneasy, not so much at the cockroach itself, but at the fact that there may be a possible infestation. Brilliant. Another inconvenience. The unit owner would have to be notified as soon as possible. He then smirked at a certain thought. As I was taking a piss one day, a cockroach made itself comfortable on my big toe. What an opening sentence for a novel that would make. he sarcastically remarked. If Charles Bukowski were alive today, Mr. L would send that sentence to the author himself. As far as he was concerned, Bukowski could have it. Excuse me. He let the teenage arthropod rest contentedly as he continued urinating. He usually consumed more water than the average human did, so this quantity of converted matter was no surprise. Oh, he knew that he would kill it. He just did not know how he would deliver its cruel fate just yet. Upon the conclusion of his bladder's favorite function, he stopped and stared at the roach. Compared to previous encounters involving the junk food of insects and unnecessary physical violation, this one was rather tame. He reminisced about the cockroach he woke up next to as it slumbered peacefully on his pillow. It was only after he screamed and cursed at the air when he realized that it was deceased. He jumped to another flashback when he poured himself a bowl of Cheerios for a light dinner. Instead of the special prize at the bottom of the box, a live roach slid out instead. Naturally, his appetite ceased to be. Lastly, he remembered the roach that climbed up his leg whilst he was taking a post-fitness shower. If Mr. L had not acted in time... If Mr. L had not acted in time, the ambitious climber would have surely reached his house of blues without the guidance of a Sherpa. All prior thoughts and experiences reverted to the undivided attention of this miniature fellow. Who was at the mercy of whom in this unexpected showdown? He looked closer and wondered about the significance of its life. As he regained composure from performing his bodily function, his mind would usually veer off in an entirely different direction. He wondered what its primary motive was, what its numerous curiosities were, and what advantages it could have while remaining stationary on his foot, nearing the big toe and encountering the ebony grassland of hair that resided behind the toenail. It stayed there, and he wondered again. Is this a mere interruption, or a demented test that is designed to maintain my focus? He did keep his focus, indeed. He thought that everyone was on equal ground, no matter what species one belonged to in life. So saith the translated words of an old Native American proverb, "The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth." It was through this proverb and other life lessons that he grew to respect and love every living creature, for his own species sickened him beyond belief for a multitude of reasons. He thought about his firm stance on animal rights and how he used to dream of a utopian society where animals and humans would be seen as equal partners, sharing the same set of benefits. He cringed when his mind brought him back to a time when he truly embarrassed himself. It happened in a speech and debate class during his junior year of high school. He presented an essay that detailed and justified this certain belief system of his, despite his pubescent naivete. It pointed out that everyone is equal, no matter what the circumstances are. This essay was written in the form of a bill, and the oral recitation was specifically assigned for the purpose of whether or not to vote for the bill. If the majority voted yea, the motion would be carried and the bill would become a law. As for the hapless Mr. L's proposal, only 3 out of 31 students voted yea. The majority voted nay, mainly because it would be illogical to grant every other species the same amount of rights because they do not share the same level of intelligence. Of course! With that bipedal logic, what was Mr. L even thinking? But then, what did it matter at this point? His mind of relevant tangents leapt into another dimension. He thought about why the instinctual reaction upon viewing an arthropod, reptile, or rodent was to freak out until one's hair was winter's powder. Why do creepy crawlies and those who slither instill such fear and repulsion in the hearts of many? Another old statement of wisdom appeared before his cranial carnival of mental delights. We fear what we do not understand. Legendary monsters came to mind at first. He then thought of certain children who were born with one or more deformities, and how people could not help but stare as they passed them by. Mr. L knew that the mindset of many people in previous centuries involved killing these poor children, simply because they looked different, as well as the underlying paranoia that they were somehow associated with the devil. With creatures such as cockroaches, though, people had every right to be afraid, considering almost every species were potential carriers of disease. They were harbingers of pestilence. Pestilence. He pondered on the difference between pestilence and living creatures. Technically, both categories are living creatures, but humans believe otherwise. Why on earth would they be created to be pestilence? Why did certain insects with stingers separate into the categories of pollinator and pest? Who are we to rank a type of creature based on the level of pestilence? Are we not already diseased enough without their assistance? He just could not comprehend it. Millions of species of cockroaches existed, some more fascinating than the next. Some had extraordinary abilities. They all shared one commonality, though: the armor and capacity to outlive humanity, no matter how many of their ancestors meet the footwear of death or the motels of no return. They had the capability to outlast a species that appeared on this planet long after they did. It was a cruel and bitter irony. Transfixed by this roach, he thought about its intricate biological structure, its adolescent age, and the unique design of its exterior shell. It was dark amber with black horizontal stripes, expanding from one side to the other. It reminded him of certain beauties that people often took for granted. No one really takes the time to stop and smell the roses, as the old adage goes. Everyone is constantly in a hurry. Beauty turned to the subject of injustice. Division of color has been occurring since time immemorial. The level of racial inequality, as well as gender inequality, enraged him so, even though there have been some smidgens of progress. He reiterated the question: why do we have to rank living creatures by usefulness and pestilence? People can easily be pests. He did not always hold that belief, but thanks to social observation, countless incidents of abuse towards Madre Tierra, endless documentation of his species killing its own kind for one reason or another, and personal experience, he knew that humans were simultaneously the most terrifying and the most futile species in the blue-green dome, no matter how advanced they were. He then shifted his thoughts to love, the prospect of it, and if this glorious power even existed. Whether or not an amorous miracle would arise from the midnight sun of Dentine enchantment, he knew that it was ultimately about love of the self. After all, this life began and ended with him. The rest was nix. He snapped out of his profundity, realizing his penis was still exposed to an audience of none. It was in this moment that he felt that this cockroach, this young, virile insect with a promising future ahead of it, even as it stood near two roach bait traps, should be spared. He wished he could find out the gender, as he despised referring to creatures as it. How pompous, how human. Goodness. Then again, removing the factor of poison coursing through its veins, perhaps this was its version of declaring, I have conquered the universe, and I have not even reached full maturity yet. I have won. Still, why did it just stand there, flaunting unwanted arrogance? Unfortunately, for this brave little creature, its arrogance would be its downfall. Conducting an unorthodox method of execution, Mr. L retrieved a single piece of toilet paper and wiped the tip of his anatomy so that it absorbed the few remaining drops of urine. He then held the same piece of now damp toilet paper, bent down, using his knees, never his back, and used it to grab and suffocate the roach. Whether or not it met its maker, he crumpled the paper into a ball, dropped it into the aquatic receptacle, and pushed the lever that operated the human-made undertow, watching intently as the once courageous creature began the journey to its final destination. After his mother squashed a cockroach using a stained fly swatter, she would always shout with accomplishment, "Death!" Death indeed. This was not death, though. It was retribution, a harsh reminder of the order of things, such as it was. He almost could not believe what had just occurred. It replayed in constant repetition as he readjusted his running shorts and washed his hands. How could it be that surreal to him? Then, it dawned on him. Even though he removed a source of pestilence, was he still a murderer for committing this heinous act? Regarding the manner in which I did so? Yes, most likely, he answered aloud before releasing a hearty laugh. How could he not be? He did not even give the roach a chance to defend its familial honor or personal dignity. The aroma of hypocrisy made its way to his third eye's set of nostrils. He nodded and accepted his near-barbaric actions. He gave his thoughts a final once-over before shaking them off, strolling towards the front door. As he set out to race among the other bipedal rats in reality's ambiguous labyrinth, he shouted towards the restroom, "Isn't inequality a bitch?" August 19th, 2020. I forgot to tell you, I wrote this 3 years ago. Well, thank you very much, Poetry Lovers. If you like what you have heard and what you have seen, please, please, please like and subscribe to this channel. I apologize for the few moments of the lack of articulation. Sometimes we stumble over our words. It happens to the best of us. And with that, poetry lives. Long live the arts.